Hey everybody, it's been a little while, but I'm back with LR lesson number 16, and today's subject is going to be two variations on something that I've already discussed, which is pattern number 5. More specifically, my advice for pattern number 5 is to look for a chosen champion, and these two things are kind of special subtypes of that I have reason to discuss separately. So, what are the objectives for today? Like I've been saying on the previous slide, I have spoken before on what I call pattern number 5 on LR. This pattern simply refers to stimuli that don't actually sound bad and unreasonable, but somehow it's still your job to find out what's wrong with it because it's a flaw, question stem, or strength and weaken assumption, whatever, something that indicates that you're dealing with an argument that does have a gap or an assumption in it, but you just intuitively can't find anything wrong with it. That's when pattern number 5 comes into play. And as I was also saying on the title slide, my go-to advice whenever you encounter a pattern number 5 stimulus is to look for what I call the chosen champion. Did the arguer propose just one thing that supposedly ends further discussion? Although I refuse to officially add two more patterns, these variants on the chosen champion syndrome seem useful enough to mention separately. So these two variants slash patterns are, well, I'll just break it into pattern 5A. These are stimuli that are based on an issue followed by a proposed solution. A closely related one is pattern 5B, where similarly the stimulus is based on an issue, but instead of a solution, there is an accusation of intent, basically acting like the arguer can read minds. They're like, oh, the person who responded this way to this issue clearly is an asshole or something like that, right? Something along those lines. Hopefully, it's already obvious how the proposed solution bit of 5A and the accusation of intent bit of 5B really are just variants of the chosen champion, um, abstract solution that I have for pattern number 5. And you can do both of the questions that I will discuss today purely with the pattern number 5 reasoning that I've provided before. However, consider the pattern 5A and 5B just the additional clues in a stimulus that let you know that you might want to look into pattern number 5. So starting right with pattern 5A, this is from PT number 7, section 4, question number 6. Yeah, even if I didn't tell you, you guys probably recognize that this is a super old question. It's actually from 1993. And it appears nowhere in the sort of normal new PT 101 through 158 series that is available for like time practice on LawHub. However, this question itself should be still directly accessible for you via drills and that sort of thing. Or you can just access, I believe it's still there. You can access the old PT numbering via LawHub. I'm not sure that you're allowed to, you can take it under time conditions anymore, but this stuff should still be there. It was last I checked. So let's start with the question stem of this one. It's a regular old assumption question, just plain Jane sufficient assumption. Uh, Breaking down the stimulus. The government provides deposit insurance. For those of you who actually are aware of it, because you opened a bank account or something, this in real life is referring to FDIC, depositors insurance. It basically means that the U.S. federal government will cover up to $200,000 worth of deposits in an account from a bank that does actually have this FDIC stuff available for you. Because depositors are the ones who benefit from this insurance, government should do something to make sure depositors are the ones who bear the cost of the insurance. Okay, a little wordy, I guess, in both the original stimulus and my paraphrase here, but it's a fairly simple thing. Um, if you're the one benefiting from the insurance, why don't you be the one to bear the cost of that insurance? Okay, pretty straightforward idea. Therefore, the government should make depositors pay the premiums for the insurance. And this is where all the problems begin for me and what I presume is. So we have the stimulus. I'll just reproduce it here. Embarking on analysis. At first glance, I had no idea what was wrong or incomplete about this argument. Because really, I mean, isn't paying for insurance exactly the same thing as paying for insurance? That's how I saw this. Because when it comes to you and me as consumers in the actual IRL world of capitalism and markets, um, like when somebody says like, "Hey, my car insurance is so expensive," that literally means their monthly premium for car insurance is expensive. And so it sounds that in our heads, the cost of insurance is essentially interchangeable with the monthly price of insurance, the premiums that they're talking about. So I didn't recognize any difference initially. However, I do notice that this is a very clear because of issue, we should take some proposed solution scenario. So that kind of activates pattern 5A here. So again, reproducing our stimulus with a little bit of coloration, but we'll get into where that comes from in a second. Continuing our analysis here. The sum issue part of the analysis is that government should ensure that the beneficiaries of insurance are also the ones who bear the cost of that insurance. That's the issue, the bearing the cost. The proposed solution to this cost-bearing issue is that the government should ensure that the beneficiaries of insurance are the ones who pay the premiums for that insurance. So yeah, I guess that's how that's really the only way to break it down. While and I suspect many of you as well, again, like I was saying in the previous slide, didn't intuitively detect the discrepancy between paying premiums for insurance versus bearing the cost of that insurance, if we are forced to insert something into the issue versus proposed solution framework, that framework at least does point out this key difference. So again, I didn't highlight red and blue to pretend like that was obvious the first time through. The red and blue actually comes from forcing ourselves to see it differently thanks to the artificially imposed issue versus solution framework that I've been talking about. Again, that's pattern 5A. When a stimulus includes an issue, it talks about like, hey, this is what we want to do. It's like a goal or an issue, and then it says, hey, this is what the this is what we should do. This is what we want to achieve versus this is what we should do. Again, issue versus solution. That seems to be really the only way to reasonably break down the stimulus in that framework. And I want to make something very, very important here. We still do not need to find a precise paraphrase in this situation. All we need to do is tell ourselves, I guess we're looking for an answer that somehow explains how bearing the cost of insurance is distinct from paying the premiums for that insurance. Again, we do not have to guess at what that actual explanation is going to be. We just need to know we're looking for something that does that, that performs that. So again, those of you who are maybe doing some of my RC content, this should have strong echoes with what I've been saying with the verb-centric approach of looking at the exam. We don't care what the explanation actually is. We care about what that explanation does. And that explanation, all it's going to do is simply going to somehow explain how the red idea, bearing the cost of insurance, is actually separate from the blue idea, paying the premiums for that insurance. That's all that we're going to do. So that's all we're going to take into the answer choices. What I have from the previous slide is reproduced up here. I guess we are looking for an answer that somehow explains that bearing the cost of insurance is distinct from paying the premiums for that insurance. That's it. That's all that we're looking for. So starting down the list with A. Banks are not insured by the government against default on the loans that banks make. No, like they're telling us that banks don't get the same thing, but why does that matter? We're only looking for how bearing the cost of insurance is distinct from paying the premiums for that insurance. And A does nothing to achieve that for us. B is running into a lot of the same trouble. Private insurance companies do not have the resources to provide banks or individuals with deposit. Again, like the government is providing insurance. The government is not trying to make the banks provide this insurance, and the banks are going to suffer for it. That's not the issue at all. Again, all we are looking for is the purple. Is this answer choice an explanation for how the red idea is separate from the blue idea? How is this explaining how bearing the cost of insurance may not be the same thing as paying the premiums on that insurance? And B fails for basically the identical reason as A. It just doesn't answer that question. C is our winner here, though. Banks do not always cover the cost of deposit insurance premiums by paying depositors lower interest rates on insured deposits than the banks would on uninsured deposits. So first of all, this is kind of wordy, and it's got the word deposits and repeatedly. But if we just kind of pick it apart and make sense of it, what is C alleging that banks aren't already doing? C is saying that banks aren't already finding some way to quote unquote charge depositors or take money or take money basically from depositors, and that taking money practice corresponds to we'll take more money from you, Mr. Depositor, if you want this fancy account with this fancy insurance on it. So that's what C is saying. Banks do not always cover the cost of the insurance premiums by paying deposits. And even if you don't want to unpack it, it literally says that right there, right? Banks do not cover the cost of premiums, right? So this is already telling us that the costs of premiums are being taken care of by some other measure other than depositors directly paying that insurance, right? So even if you don't want to unpack it further and really understand that this is about a cost shifting mechanism, which is very common in, I guess, everywhere. It's not just capitalism. Every economic system is about the more powerful party pushing costs onto the weaker party. But leaving that ideological discussion aside, C literally is just trying to say that, hey, the cost of premiums the cost of premiums are getting covered some other way. The cost of this insurance are getting covered some other way without having the depositor directly pay the premiums for the insurance. So C quite literally answers the question that we're looking for. D, we're going to eliminate for the same reasons as A and B. The government limits the insurance protection it provides by insuring accounts up to a certain legally. Okay, so it's not an infinite insurance, but again, how does that does not address the potential difference between what does it mean to bear the cost and what does it mean to directly pay the premiums. This doesn't touch that whatsoever. And E, again, more of the same. The government does not allow banks to offer some kinds of accounts in which deposits are not insured. Okay, so this insurance exists on every single account. Okay, but does that still answer the question of how the red idea might not be the same as the blue idea? No, no, it does not. And so really, I just want to emphasize here, like, yes, there is a sort of analytical, there is some depth to C, right? But you don't have to worry if you don't actually get what C says. What C is saying, even if you don't understand directly, it is the only one here that actually tries to talk about cost of insurance and who is paying for that cost, right? It's the only one that's even having the right discussion. So as long as you can kind of see the fact that the red, blue, purple thing exists, C is really the only one that could possibly have any hope of being the correct answer. I do have some remarks though, starting with, I mean, I've seen explanations for this question online done by other places. I'm not going to call them out by name, but you know who the usual suspects are. And usually they pretend like the whole idea of banks successfully pass these costs on to customers already. They act like you should have seen that or predicted that ahead of time. And it's not impossible, but really, I mean, when somebody says something like that, like, oh, you should have predicted this very specific thing in this very specific situation. Not only is such talk, in my mind, a betrayal of the general principle against bringing IRL knowledge to bear on LR, but I think it's also a bit unrealistic to expect from many of us, especially under time pressure. Like, some of us may be pretty financially savvy. Maybe many of us already are familiar with what deposit insurance, like I was mentioned earlier, FDIC, you know, as soon as your parents kind of took you to the bank, maybe if your parents did do this and you made an account, um, that's one of the things that should have been explained to you is that you can put money in here if something happens and your account, something is not your fault and your account just gets wrecked basically and or is stolen from you. The government will give you back up to $200,000 worth of whatever you put in there, right? So this is not unusual. This is not unusual. We are and we're not dumb for not seeing it immediately, but it's just I just find it unrealistic that you can expect everyone to come up with that very specific prediction about cost shifting. I mean, yeah, okay, I'll say in retrospect, it's not a particularly complex idea. The deposit insurance is not complex. Neither is the idea that you find some way to push costs off onto other people. Neither of those are really complex. But the real key here is be honest here. As consumers, when someone in real life, like a friend or somebody, complains that, ah, man, insurance, my car insurance, my home, whatever, X insurance costs a lot, we instantly know what they're saying is that the price I'm paying every month, these insurance premiums, these are expensive, these are costly. So to us, a reasonable consumer who is actually engaged with the modern insurance economy, we have basically been conditioned to see that premiums are the cost of insurance. Like what I mean, sure, you could have some larger policy discussion about, like, what does insurance do for our society? And is there a sort of hidden cost to it? I mean, yeah, but that's not a conversation that I think you would expect to have with yourself under these circumstances. Normally, we would default to the most accessible thing, which is premiums literally are the same thing as the cost of insurance in our heads. So to kind of bring it home here, I believe my methodology that I've laid out on the previous slides is objectively superior because it gets your mind to recognize the problem, i.e., there is somehow a difference between bearing costs and paying premiums, without depending on predicting the exact solution, which is the cop out that I see a lot of other places pushing on you guys. And just a couple other remarks. Some of you who've seen my older LR stuff may have noticed the return of the faithful old red, blue, purple framework on the previous slides, which refers to just the breakdown of ideas, right? Perhaps the best way to think of this is to say that the proposed solution shtick that I just covered helps you see that underlying simple red, blue, purple standard one-star assumption. You talk about red in the premise, you talk about blue in the conclusion, so purple must sort of unify the red and the blue, bridge the gap. Yeah, that's the most basic one-star assumption question methodology that there is. But that is what this question underneath quite literally is. That's what this is. The whole thing is that they managed to hide it under the concepts of premiums versus cost of insurance because we I think can be expected to have difficulty disentangling those two ideas. So the proposed solution framework that I gave you, the issue versus proposed solution framework that I gave you, is just another way of getting at that underlying red, blue, purple simplicity. Others among you might recognize that this question is also very doable via the standard pattern number 5 chosen champion method that I've already covered, way back when, right? If you can identify the proposed solution as the chosen champion here, you'd end up with something like, I guess we're looking for something where paying premiums doesn't solve the issue of bearing the cost of insurance. So, as you can tell, that's essentially the same thing as what the more specialized issue versus proposed solution framework gives you. The point of all this is that while other methods can certainly get you to the answer, recognizing the issue versus proposed solution concept in a stimulus can just set you up for underlying the actual issue, whether you want to call it red, blue, purple, or the chosen champion, wherever you want to call it. You can get to that core more reliably. So now let's push on to pattern 5B, and this is from a noticeably more recent exam, although it's still kind of old-ish. This is from PT 125, section number 4. This is number 15. So starting with the stem of this one, this is a roll-over statement question of all things. And it's a stimulus, looking at the stimulus, it's fairly simple. Let's just break it down here. We start off by hearing that the city made an ordinance, law, fancy word for law/regulation, requiring bike riders and bicycle riders to wear helmets. But we're also told that if the city wanted to improve biker safety, they would have done other things instead, other things, other than this ordinance that they put out. And the conclusion based on all this is that the city ends up caring more about the appearance of biker safety more than actual biker safety. So yeah, that's a pretty clear accusation. So I do want to put out this disclaimer before going further into analysis. I made several variants of the analysis I'm about to do, and I think that there are 3, possibly arguably even 4, very valid and very distinct methods to break down the stimulus. That being said, for the sake of runtime, I'm only going to cover just one of these methods, which, surprise, surprise, is the one that focuses on attacking the accusation of intent / pretense of mind reading that we just observed. All right, so with that disclaimer in mind, let's just get into it. Again, reproducing the stimulus up here and moving to the analysis. Again, a reminder, this is just one of what I would consider several valid ways of cracking this nut. But let's deal with the accusation of intent. Anytime you notice that an arguer claims to know what anybody else was thinking or intended, the following analysis might be a good thing to try. So as a general rule, I look for 2 things anytime I want to determine intent. The first is, did the person that I'm trying to, pretend like I know what they're thinking about, did they have X important piece of information in their head? And did the person say or do Y thing that clearly indicates what they think about X, if they were even thinking about it in the first place? So basically, I need to know something about what's inside their head, and I need to be able to see their actions or something external and observable that indicates clearly what they think about that piece of information that I happen to know that they have in their head. Unsurprisingly, the stimulus fails to address either of these questions. The first, with item number 1 in terms of what the city had inside its head, we have 0 clue whether or not the city was thinking that the helmet ordinance would give the appearance of them caring about bike safety. So maybe they sincerely thought that they were doing the right thing, right? Or they weren't trying to look good. They just did it because they just did it, right? We don't know what was in their head because we're not told in the stimulus. We also have zero clue whether or not the city was aware of the right things to do. That maybe the city didn't even know that they had alternatives. Maybe they thought, the only thing we're allowed to do is this bike law, and so that really changes the validity of the accusation at the end, right? And we can come up with all this just by knowing that, just by observing the stimulus, saying that we don't actually know what the city council was thinking when they made this. We don't actually have any of that data, so that's a problem right there. But let's say you don't really buy into the clarity of what I'm saying for item number one. So even if you assume the city thought that the ordinance would have that effect and that they were, that they were aware that it was going to make them look good, we still have zero clue whether or not the city was thinking about that issue when it issued the helmet ordinance. So this is weirder, but like, sure, maybe the city was somehow aware of the effect of the bike helmet, but do we know that them issuing that law actually means that that's what they were going for, right? Maybe that was just something that they knew would happen, but that wasn't their intent, or maybe they're incompetent. Don't if you've worked with governments long enough, you'll realize that there's no end, and there's no you'll never reach the bottom of the depths of incompetence that you see in government bodies. But maybe they knew, but they just for some reason forgot that this had this PR effect. And when they passed, there's nothing inherent about passing this ordinance that indicates that this is exactly what they were thinking about. And this is the same thing with the right, the right side of the equation, right? Even if the city was aware of the right things to do, all those things that our arguer mentioned, right? All the other alternatives, like the driver, education, all that kind of stuff. Even if the city was aware of the right things to do, maybe for some unknown reason, they just weren't thinking about that when they made the decision. Maybe a smarmy lobbyist got them really focused on helmets only, right? There could be any number of reasons. It doesn't really matter what that reason is. Just because they passed this law, we don't really know what they were thinking when they did it. We don't know what they were thinking when they did it. So, to put it all a bit more simply here, um, the only things that we can observe about the city and its passage of the helmet ordinance is that there was a right way to pursue bicycle safety, according to our arguer. There's all these other things that the city should have done. But again, the only thing we know is that the city went another way. If the city failed to pursue that right way and went in another direction, right? That's all we know. That's all we know. I mean, sure, that's something, but it is certainly not what our arguer concludes, right? That's it. So accusing someone of failure is quite different from purporting to know the reasons for that failure, particularly the internal sort of mental processes that go behind that failure. There's, there are ways to get around this. This stimulus utterly failed to do any of that. In terms of answers, I'm actually not going to do them. This one can fairly be straightforwardly done by process of elimination or even simpler strategies than that. And detecting the failures to establish elements one and two of intent, objectively answering the two questions that I proposed on the previous slide doesn't actually help in choosing the correct answer quite as much as just good elimination practices will. All I wanted was an example of a stimulus that shows how weak the vast majority of these accusations of intent or pretenses of mind reading are in LR. Even if it seems like a relevant premise justifies such an accusation. And so, I mean, yeah, I could have chosen an example that they do exist, where the correct answer choice is literally you are not allowed to pretend to read minds, but I just wanted to keep 100% of the focus on the stimulus instead of the answers. And I know that when I sort of cherry pick things, the focus tends to be on answer choice analysis for most of you anyway. So yeah, for this question, I just wanted to show you how something that you may have recognized was not quite right in the stimulus, but couldn't put your finger on it. This is how to do it for this particular subvariant of pattern number 5. And that brings us to the end of the presentation. So yeah, the whole point of today was just to introduce you to two fairly regularly occurring subtypes of the chosen champion in LR. 5A is the proposed solution to some issue, and 5B is the accusation of intent in response to some issue. Being able to recognize when an arguer is proposing a solution or accusing someone of a particular intent can set you up to recognize the correct answer, even if you can't pre-phrase it. So that's really the primary value of being able to do this, is that it'll just give you a sort of low IQ schematic mechanism, whatever you want to call it, pattern, to break down these very specialized types of stimuli that can be answered any number of ways, but you can at least put yourself in a position to clearly recognize the correct response, even if you don't know how to predict it word for word, which is weirdly what a lot of online explanations seem to suggest that you do for things like this. But yeah, you guys know that's not the way that I work, so hence you have the methodology that you have here. And as usual, thanks for watching. This is how you get a hold of me. Do all the usual algorithm things, and but I especially encourage you to reach out with questions. I do like responding to you guys, and it's an easy way for you to get help, an easy way for me to give you help. So yeah, see you guys in the next one.